So, welcome again. I see things have shifted now over to this side. We have a morning session that'll be in two parts. Can you hear me back there? Yeah? We have a morning session that will be in two parts. The first will be just a short presentation till our break. And then we'll deal with some specific questions that have been asked. In the afternoon session, I have been asking you to look through this and find some parts that have some relevance to you, and I would like you to do just short presentations. The open mic, as they say. You will now show me how much you have absorbed. It's not mandatory, but those of you who would like to say something could instruct us. There will always also be a handout at the break, after the break, to give us one specific part of the text. And then in the evening session, we will have something else.
It's clear.
Yeah, I thought so. Spent many hours thinking out. Since this is the first day of summer, of course, the way they do it here in the Netherlands, it rained. So, to give us a balance of fire and water, steam and... One of the questions that has been asked to me is, why are there only 3 instructions in this book? Why are there only 3 instructions? Because instruction number 1 was issued in January, February 1889, and number 2 in March, April 1889. So it's indicative that they had planned to issue one every 2 months. The school was started in October 1888, so it appears that they would have issued an instruction every 2 months. And HPB was certainly capable of that. But there wasn't another instruction for 7 months. And I'll just read you the explanation here. For those of you who want to follow, it's on page XVII, the bottom of it. That instruction number 3 was issued at the end of 1888. 7 months had elapsed since the previous installment of the teachings. In a notification sent out to members of the school in advance of instruction number 3, HPB explained the delay by citing the contents of 2 letters sent by the masters from Sikkim. We are now on page XVII, page 18, in March and August of that year. Apparently, members of the school had not taken the nature of its work as seriously as they should have. For one of the letters, and this is from the masters, noted, experience but too clearly proves that any departure from time-honored rules for the government and instruction of the disciple to suit Western custom and prejudices is a fatal policy. Before the student can be taught, he must learn how to conduct himself as regards the world, his teacher, the sacred science, and his inner self. And it continues at the bottom, violation of ancient usages is sure to result in evil. The office of the teacher was considered as a very solemn and responsible one among our Asiatic ancestors, and the pupil was always enjoined to obedience and loyalty. And she issues this preliminary memorandum, which is There is an abridged version as appendix number 3. But it's very critical and causistic about people who were joining the school and what they were expecting. And in fact, it ends, because our version in here is one that was actually issued later on, but the original one ends with the words, "And now I must close. For some of you, I have little doubt that this will turn out to be a parting farewell letter." So obviously the members had not understood, those who were joining the school had not really understood the nature of its work or what it had planned to do. In fact, now we will briefly turn to page 103 for those of you who have the book. And this is now instruction number 3 that she writes after. This comes out December 1889, January 1890. And we just read the very first part. "As many have written and almost complained to me that they could find no practical, clear application of certain diagrams appended to the first 2 instructions, and others have spoken of their abstruseness, a short explanation is necessary. The reason of this difficulty in most cases has been that the point of view taken was erroneous. The purely abstract and metaphysical was mistaken for and confused with the concrete and physical." So these instructions were meant to be taken in a very abstract and metaphysical way, and people were taking them as physical and tangible things. This section actually is really a remarkable one, and it sums up her ideas about esotericism. "It must be remembered that the study of occultism proceeds from universals to particulars. Universals to particulars, not the reverse as accepted by science." Okay, we'll skip that bottom part, turn the page to 104, the beginning of 104. "Of a truth, the aphorism of the Hermetic wisdom, as above, so below, applies to all esoteric instruction. But we must begin with the above. We must learn the formula before we can sum up the series." So we already have spent some time with this Hermetic tablet that starts out, as above, so below. So she's referring to this. The aphorism of Hermetic wisdom, as above, so below, applies to all esoteric instruction, but we must begin with the above. Now to the third paragraph. "The diagrams and plates are intended to familiarize students with the leading ideas of occult correspondences only. The very genius of metaphysical or macrocosmic or spiritual occultism, forbidding the use of figures or even symbols further than as temporary aids. Once define an idea in words, and it loses its reality. Once define an idea in words, and it loses its reality. Once figure a metaphysical idea, and you materialize its spirit. Figures must be used only as ladders to scale the battlements, ladders to be disregarded once the foot is set upon the rampart. Let the esotericists, therefore, be very careful to spiritualize the instructions and avoid materializing them. Let them always try to find the highest meaning possible, confident that in proportion they approach the material and visible in their speculations on the instructions, so far are they from the right understanding of them. This is especially the case with these first instructions and diagrams, For as in all true arts, so in occultism, we must learn the theory before we are taught the practice. We must learn the theory before we are taught the practice. And then she gives instruction number 3, which is somewhat different than the other ones. There's less stuff in them, and she really just deals with 2 particular issues which we've touched at already. And just as a comment on this, I found a very nice piece by Dr. I.K. Taimani, written in 1975 for the Centenary of the Society. And here is his little comment, that spiritual life is not a matter of purely theoretical knowledge, is not even a matter of leading a righteous and altruistic life. It is a matter of actual perception of our spiritual nature in an ever-increasing measure. To the extent that we have gained this perception or actual realization that we are a spirit or a center in divine consciousness, to that extent only we should consider ourselves spiritual. To be really spiritual means that our consciousness is centered in the realm of reality and our life flows from that center naturally and effortlessly. In that highest sense only, those who have attained self-realization can be considered truly spiritual. That spiritual life is not a matter of purely theoretical knowledge. And I think this is what the masters in turn wrote HPB about. Remember, the section is not, the school wasn't something that a bunch of people met together and said they're going to have a study group. It was the result of an inner impulse. Spiritual life, especially of a spiritual center, flows from within, without. There is an inner impulse that in turn provides an outer reality. And as she points out, she was the outer head, and there was an inner head. And so Dr. Taimani makes this really clear in that spiritual life, I think people had gotten confused about what this section was about. So his comment is really nice. Spiritual life is not a matter of purely theoretical knowledge. It's not even a matter of leading a righteous and altruistic life. It is a matter of actual perception of our spiritual nature in an ever-increasing measure. And hopefully all of our studies, all of our work leads us to this realization of our spiritual nature. To the extent we have gained this perception or actual realization that we are a spirit or a center in divine consciousness, to that extent only we should consider ourselves spiritual. To consider ourselves a center in divine consciousness. So of course we here are, for instance, in this wonderful center that is truly a center in that consciousness, a manifestation on the physical terrestrial plane of that divine consciousness, where all of nature is free to express itself. These are what great centers do. They allow nature, the spiritual life, to express itself. To be really spiritual means that our consciousness is centered in the realm of reality. That our consciousness is centered in the realm of reality. And what is reality? Of course, the real is that which does not change, which does not fluctuate. Everything we know, our personalities, even the worlds, globes, manvantaras come and go. But there is that self-existent reality that is not touched or shaken by changes, civilizations come and go, cultures come and go, but that enduring reality remains. and our life flows from that center naturally and effortlessly. When we exist on that plane, there is a natural flowing of that reality, that spirituality, effortlessly and naturally. So this is what she was aiming at. And that preliminary memorandum that is included as appendix number 3 contains a number of extracts from the Book of Discipline of the school she belongs to, and ends with the famous, well-known piece. This is from the letter of the Master. Hold on. Letter from the Master. Behold the truth before you. A clean life, an open mind, a pure heart, an eager intellect, an unveiled spiritual perception, a brotherliness for one's co-disciple, a readiness to give and receive advice and instruction, a loyal sense of duty to the teacher, a willing obedience to the behest of truth. Once we have placed our confidence in and believe that teacher to be in possession of it, a courageous endurance of personal injustice, a brave declaration of principles, a valiant defense of those who are unjustly attacked, and a constant eye to the ideal of human progression and perfection which the secret science depicts. These are the golden stairs up the steps of which the learner may climb to the temple of divine wisdom. And it's interesting to note that that paragraph is the only thing that is still used from all of this material. That is the only thing still used by the school from all of this material. Now, you may think that maybe you disagree with Dr. Besant, C.W. Leadbeater, C.J. Narajadasa, N. Sri Ram, I.K. Taimani, Radha Bernier, that they thought that was the core of this material. This is what it was really aiming at. Perhaps you know better, but I'm not sure. Femi, you had a question? The microphone?
No, I need no microphone. I would like to know from which you quote this beautiful thing of timing. Could you put it on the
Timing, it's called the Centenary of the Theosophical Society. It's from the Theosophist of November 1975. The Centenary of the Theosophical Society, some suggestions for celebrations. And actually, he is quite critical about all of these things. For instance, he says, there is no harm in having lectures, meetings, and discussions, but unless these are directed and motivated by a definite purpose and are followed by resolute action, which raises the level of our life, at least to some extent, their value is negligible. Every year we are having conventions, conferences, and camps. Can we honestly say that they produce a lasting beneficial effect on our life and raise our consciousness to a higher level? Let every member of the Theosophical Society ask this question and try to find the answer within his own heart. So he points out that, yes, we have all of these events, but what is the lasting effect on us as people, as students, as those of us who are seeking to be participants in the great work of the Masters, which is the great work of life and humanity itself. So it's called the Centenary of the Theosophical Society. You probably have it in the library. It's the Theosophist Centenary edition from November 1975. It's a very interesting piece. And he actually, as to quote, he starts off by saying that this article may appear to strike a different note in the symphony of enthusiastic literary contributions suggesting methods of celebrating the centenary of the Theosophical Society in a benefiting manner. So he suggests, yes, and in 1975 there was enthusiasm about 100 years, but as he points out, unless these activities, events, there is no harm in having lectures, meetings, and discussions, but unless these are directed and motivated by a definite purpose and are followed by a resolute action, which raises the level of our life, at least to some extent, their value is negligible. Very few people in the movement would have the tenacity to say that sort of thing, especially at a time when everybody was on this wave of enthusiasm, but sometimes one has to speak truth, and which he did. So it's interesting that she has these three instructions. In the collected writings, there is an instruction 4 and an instruction 5. But those were actually created by Annie Besant and W.Q. Judge from the material in here, referred to as notes of some oral teaching. So I had preferred to go back to the originals as opposed to their editions, which contain material by them and by HPB. Better to, since this book is Esoteric Instructions by H.P. Blavatsky, to give her views and interpretation. Now, the interesting thing is then suddenly, what does she do? Instruction 3 comes out at the end of the year, and that's it for her. She lives another year and a half, and though she could have, she doesn't write anything further for the school. Perhaps she was disappointed. Perhaps students were still caught in this mind-bound set of stuff. They had the wonderful creativity in the secret doctrine, but again, as we suggest today, not to mistake the map for the place. A map is an indication of what is, but as Dr. Tymony says, unless this gives us some transformation, it simply remains a map. And we are people who are just reading a guidebook, but not actually visiting the place itself. You'll see this here and you'll see this there, but never actually going to the place itself. So what does she do? She does something very, very remarkable, as only HPB does. She writes a little book that in turn is not limited to the school, because I'm sure if she had limited it to the school, and it was published later, people would say, well, why was this published? How could you publish this X, Y, and Z? But she writes this little book, The Voice of the Silence, which must be considered part and parcel of these esoteric teachings. Because if you look at the dedication, it is dedicated to the few. Now, people who didn't know about the work of the esoteric school would think, oh, well, the few serious people. But the few are the esoteric school, who were a few people who decided. So it's dedicated to the few, to the school. And she starts out by pointing out that the following pages are derived from the Book of the Golden Precepts, one of the works put into the hands of mystic students in the East. The knowledge of them is obligatory in that school, the teachings of which are accepted by many Theosophists. So she is now giving, because this is the thing that is lacking in the instructions. There is no work about meditation, self-transformation, all of those things. As you well know, I don't have to belabor the point, the book is divided into 3 parts. There is fragment 1, and then fragment 2 and 3. 2 and 3 hold together as a text. It's definitely Buddhistic in world outlook. They talk about 2 paths. She gives you the example of the Bodhisattva, the Nirmanakaya, and the Pratyeka Buddha. The Pratyeka Buddha is the student who studies for themselves. They study and they learn a lot of stuff and they gain something, but then go on, don't affect the world. The path of the Bodhisattva, the Nirmanakaya, is one who then studies and similarly learns all of this, but then stays behind to instruct all of humanity. This is followed by the fragment on the 7 portals, where she gives the way of attaining this state. It can be called Paramitayana. The great Tibetan teacher Tsongkhapa has written a gigantic text on this subject that is known as the Paramitayana. Yana being the vehicle of the paramitas. That by practicing the paramitas, these 7 virtues, one actually is able to attain that wonderful state. But fragment 1 is really much different because it is very Indian, Hindu in orientation, and it is really a meditation text. And we have not really dealt with that as this separate fragment. So briefly, I will look at this with you, because to me, this then gives you the key to unlock the other material. Otherwise, you are just reading this material with exoteric eyes, and it's just another text of study as opposed to a means to self-transformation. And it's interesting that she starts out that these instructions are for those ignorant of the dangers of the lower idi. These lower faculties, where again, the world, the material world, we are caught up in our studies. And that he who would hear the voice of Nara, the soundless sound, and comprehend it, he has to learn the nature of Dhaarana. Students often are not able to focus or concentrate. We take up one subject, we move on to something else, and something else gets their attention. But the ability to concentrate and focus is the beginning of this stage. The nature of Dhaarana. She points out that the mind is the great slayer of the real. The mind is the great slayer of the real. And we've dealt with this. So what is the mind? The manas, the thinking faculty. The acquiring faculty is the mind. Yes? No? The mind, the thinking. Manas means the thinker, man, the thinker. That thinking part of us. And then she says, let the disciple slay the slayer. So put this away for a moment. And then that allows, for then the soul will hear, and then will remember, and to the inner ear will speak the voice of the silence. This earth, O disciple, is the hall of sorrow. This earth, O ignorant disciple, is but the dismal entrance leading to the twilight that precedes the valley of true light. So as good as this world is, it's still a twilight leading to realities even greater. The English poet Keats had a line that heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter still. Right? That think of the great music we heard last night, creativity. It is taking something unheard and bringing it to our attention. And then she says, this is now the core of it. In order to become the knower of all self, capital letters, all self, thou hast first of self to be the knower. In order to become the knower of the whole thing, the big plan, thou hast first of self to be the knower. To reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast to give up self to non-self. Being to non-being. So all of the ego, the entity, has to be just put aside for that moment, that we can see that divine reality. In that famous Chohan's letter, they talk about putting aside the self to see ourselves abiding in that divine reality. As the Buddhists themselves say, there is no nirvana samsara, there is only that reality. But we keep thinking that we're going to go from here to there, while as our past president has pointed out, and J. Krishnamurti has pointed out, it's really from there to here. So to reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast to give up self to non-self, being to non-being, and then thou canst repose between the wings of the great bird. A great bird in Indian philosophy, in the Vedas, is Hamsa. It's a swan. It's not a bird that is actually flapping. We had some of us discuss this elsewhere, and people were saying, well, it must be very bumpy to be in the middle of between these two wings, but for instance, if you're in a plane that's taking off, it's a very smooth ride. Hamsa is, of course, the breath. Right? That the body is constantly saying this mantra constantly, thousands of times, unknown to ourselves. We are actually breathing this, saying this prayer, this acclamation. A sweet is rest between the rings of that which is not born nor dies, but is the Om throughout eternal ages. The Om throughout eternal ages. And those of you who have read the book notice that she starts out in instruction number 1, first with a warning about people who take up this study to be very, very careful, because it brings all of these things to the fore. All of these things are known to ourselves. And then she gives us Om. Page 4. Om, says the Aryan adept, the son of the fifth race, who with this syllable begins and ends the salutation to the human being, his conjuration of or appeal to non-human presences. Om Mani, murmurs the Turanian adept, the descendant of the fourth race, and after passing adds Padme Hum. She goes on trying to give its derivation that Orientalists have at the time translated to mean the jewel in the lotus. In this, the most sacred of all Eastern formulas, not only has every syllable a secret potency producing a definite result, but the whole evocation has 7 meanings and can produce 7 different results. Each may differ from the others. She goes on about the 7 differences, corresponding numbers. Thus, the mystic sentence, page 6, Om Mani Padme Hum, when rightly understood, instead of being composed of the most meaningless words, O jewel in the lotus, contains a reference to the indissoluble union between man and the universe, rendered in 7 different ways, and having the capability of 7 different applications to as many planes of thought and action. So she gives right at the beginning probably the most precious and practical thing, this great mantra. This is what it looks like in Tibetan. We have one, I believe, out here. We pass it every moment, yet it's a great holy phrase. It is the gift of the great Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara to the Tibetan people. It is their protection. It is like a great protection against all negativity. And this word, Om, she gives it at the beginning and then goes on, and then people rush on to all the other stuff, not realizing that right there is truly the pearl of great price. That this word, it's so sacred in Hinduism that they don't even pronounce it. They call it pranava. Pranava, the sound of prana. And in fact, there is a saying that the Vedas, which are the core of Hinduism, the Vedas are revealed, while all of other Indian scripture are created by man. The Veda is revealed. It's interesting that the ancient rishis didn't hear it in such an oral culture where there was no writing, imagine they memorized thousands and thousands of verses and shlokas, but they saw the riks, the sacrifice. So it was something they saw and they replicated on earth to help this intermediary, the harmony between heaven and earth. But there is a wonderful phrase that the Vedas, the essence of the Vedas is the Gayatri, the hymn that all Hindus say in morning to the rising sun. And then the essence of Gayatri is the word Om. That is, because that is the vibratory sound of the universe. The universe is just a vibration. As you know in the Secret Doctrine, she just says that it's really the abstract can be known to us only through space, duration, and motion. We can't think of anything without the idea of spatial. Some space, even if there is nothing in space, there's space. Duration, it must have some endless time, but duration is not time. And then it's not a static emptiness. We can imagine as far back as we can till there is nothingness, nichvas, but it's not a static emptiness. It is motion, and that motion is a vibration, and that vibration is revealed to us at our cycle through the word Om. Since she considers this the heart of these instructions, not the other stuff. You know, as a digression, there is this wonderful sutra in Buddhism called the Lotus Sutra. It's one of the most famous Mahayana sutras known throughout all of Asia. And in fact, it is considered so holy that just by chanting the first words, Nyam Ying Yuro Ke He, you can attain liberation. In fact, one of the greatest practitioners is Tina Turner. They made a movie of her life, and I remember being in Los Angeles at the time, and my friend wanted to go see it, and I said to her, I wonder if they're going to mention the Lotus Sutra. First thing on the screen, before titles and everything, is a quote from the Lotus Sutra. And in the movie, it shows her turbulent life as a poor black girl from the regional South, suddenly having a chance to express her gift, her talent, an abusive relationship where she's almost in slavery, and how then visiting a friend chanting this has been her key to freedom. By chanting this and doing this, she is able to get out of this. And of course, the crux of the movie is her husband beating her badly in the back of a limousine, and she manages to escape the car and go to a hotel and says, I'm Tina Turner, I don't have any money, but if you just give me a room, I'll be able to pay you. And of course, then has this remarkable resurgence of a career, and of course, is a Swiss citizen. You may know that she's no longer an American citizen. She is married to a German and is a Swiss citizen. In fact, I hear speaks very excellent German. So maybe you can have her come here. Why not? You're laughing, but she does. This is her life now. She has done an excellent album with two other women on just simply chance. I'm sure she would jump at the opportunity. All things are possible until we try, right? Wouldn't that be?
Monday evening?
It'll be a little too soon, I think, to get her here but I would even come for that. Tina Turner at the International Theosophical Center, backed up by the quartet. But no, if you hear her music now, it is very spiritual and very chanting, so it shows you there is hope. But this Lotus Sutra gives this particular story, because it's about the Buddha lecturing to a vast array of bodhisattvas. The Buddha, somewhat like myself, lecturing to you, lecturing to this array of bodhisattvas, and he gives them this story. A man, a very wealthy man, has a great, beautiful house. Now you may ask yourself, is this my... He has this house and he comes home and the building is on fire. But his children are still in the building. But he realizes that they're so young, if he calls out, children, children, come out, there's a fire, they may not even know what the word means. Mm-hmm. Or they may run further into the building. So he calls to them, children, I've brought you wonderful ponies, and I brought you all of these wonderful toys and gifts. And that then lures them out of the building. And he says that the burning building is this world that we're so comfortable living in, yet is a building that is burning around us and ready to collapse to our own detriment. The Buddha is that very wealthy man. We are the children, and that all of those teachings that fascinate the mind are just the means to get us out of the burning building, right? The hooks to get us out of all of that. So this word, Om, really sums up all of this. And it's interesting, she gives it right at the beginning. You know, most teachers, lamas, yogis, swamis, everything, start off by giving the student the mantra. And I find it very interesting that she starts out exactly the same way. She gives you that mantra, and then, of course, people then go on looking at something else and something else and something else, not realizing that they've been given that pearl of great price, the jewel that's in that lotus. So we will just spend a moment on this word, the Om. Our international vice president has an excellent piece in the 2012-13 Add Your Library Bulletin, Brahma Vidya and Om, which I would highly recommend to you. Dr. Chittarajan Satapathy has gathered together all of the sayings from the Upanishads, and when you read it, then you realize how really then remarkable it is. It is the foundation of all things. It also has an obituary of the former librarian, the librarian of the Adyar Library. She was a doctor of literature, great Sanskrit scholar, goes on for her work for the Theosophical Society, presidency, welfare activities, But this piece on Brahma Vidya and Om really collects all of those pieces to show that how remarkable that there are swamis who do nothing but chant the Om. That's their entire teaching. You know, our society is a great and remarkable thing. It has contributed really remarkably to the world. But the world is not interested in what we are saying today. As you know, our membership is dwindling dramatically, not just in one place, but worldwide. Even a country like India has 12,000 members, which in a 1.5 billion population, if you put in per capita, would mean that it has a percentage of members like Togo or Ghana. Because we are telling them things, we are like a doctor who is giving the patient something that they don't need. Think of the most popular, there is a guru called Amma, who fills stadiums, collects no money, and all she does, people stand for hours and she just simply gives them the embrace, the contact, that warmth that can say more to them than any dialogue, teaching, instruction. So the world has changed, but we have not been able to adapt our message to the world. We are talking to ourselves to an extent. And unless the heart is truly opened, you know, as I keep saying, Theosophists seem to be in the throat chakra, and we really need to be not going back down, but up to the higher intuitional chakra. There's another volume, which I don't know if your bookshop has, but I highly recommend it to you, the Yoga Upanishads. This is published by the Adyar Library. The last time previously that I was in India, I mentioned to our international president that this book had been out of print since 1952. It was 2007. I said, I don't know why you don't reprint this book. It is excellent. It's all the Upanishads dealing with yoga, including the one she cites in The Voice of the Silence, the Nada Bindu Upanishad, the Brahma Vidya Upanishad. And when I went back last year, lo and behold, I see 2008. Suddenly it has come back into print since 1952. So I was really happy with that. So the nature of Om, it encapsulates everything. Everything. HPB, of course, says it's in 3 syllables. One does not even have to be knowledgeable about what it's saying. Starts O, So it starts in the back of the throat. Om. It represents the 3 worlds. So physical, intermediate, the abstract. Represents the 3 states, waking, sleeping, deep sleep. And what we are told is in pronouncing the word, we are also supposed to meditate on the silence after. It has a bindu, it has a little circle with a dot, which is that nasal. It isn't M, it's because it is vibrated. It's not just something you say with just the vocal cords, it's something you say with your entire body. So let's see how good you do it, shall we? Shall we? So get some air into your lungs, get those lungs open. And first we'll just see how well you do with the word. We'll all do it together. Beautiful, beautiful. Did you feel that? It gave me goosebumps. So then again, let's try it, but then vibrating it. Let's vibrate it with our entire being. Ready? And now for the 3rd time, let's not just say it, vibrate it, but feel it as an invocation going out. It is an invocation to the divine, an acknowledgement to the divine. So, do you hear that? Do you hear that? Isn't that the most wonderful sound? I bet you one thing, the devas have certainly taken notice. Here, those devas that are here, the angels have certainly, they're talking to us again. They're talking our language. So this word, if you were to ask me what is the core and what is the purpose of all of this, is she gives that word. But we want stuff. I remember our international president saying that if data was enough, the world would have been transformed long ago. So that sensate mind needs something to hold on to. But yet, this word that perhaps has no meaning to us, and there are endless correlations in it. Endless correlations. This word, in turn, is the thing. Bestride the bird of life, if thou wouldst know. Give up thy life, if thou wouldst live. for a moment, putting aside our physical needs, limitations, the I, with its grasping needs, this thing that brings us into conflict, to put that aside a second and to be able to move into that state. Behold the host of souls, watch how they hover o'er the stormy sea of human life, and how exhausted, bleeding, broken-winged they drop one after another on the swelling waves. Tossed by the fierce winds, chased by the gale, they drift into the eddies and disappear within the first great vortex. The self of matter and the self of spirit can never meet. One of the twain must disappear. There is no place for both. Someone had asked a question about that bridge, that link, the Dhaarana, which we will look at in this second segment, about that bridge between the higher and lower, because she has some interesting things to say in the instructions. Before thou canst not travel on the path, before thou hast become that path itself. And yet, listen, let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself has wiped it from the sufferer's eye. But let each burning human tear drop on thy heart and there remain, nor ever brush it off until the pain that caused it is removed. These tears, O thou of heart most merciful, these are the streams that irrigate the field of charity and love immortal. This is what we are aiming at, charity and love immortal, because at our nature, we are that charity, we are that love immortal. We are not only a light, we are not only a vibration, but life itself we call Mother Nature. Life itself is compassion. And all we have to do is to open up to it. So the book itself, and HPB has written somewhere that this text actually is something from South India, that she translates it from Telugu, while the rest of it is certainly very Buddhistic. But if you look at this first fragment, it is very, very much in key with Indian yoga teachings about focusing the mind. It allows us, of course, but once you have that focus, then, as she says, then play ducks and drakes with the body, eating, drinking, and sleeping, but living always on the ideal. So yes, we can go back into this world, we can do our studies, we can do everything, but it is focused on the ideal. Let him make a bundle of the lower four and pin them to the higher state. He should center on this higher, trying not to permit the body and intellect to draw him down and carry him away. So then to focus on this higher state, and then she points out, as she asks the students, that let the students, therefore, be very careful to spiritualize the instructions and avoid materializing them. Let them always try to find the highest meaning possible. Right? So, in approaching this, and it's amazing, she starts out with this warning, and people just sort of don't take these things as they should, because without the right approach, you are just on the road to perdition. And I've seen good, kind people just become horrid, transformed in ways that are just somewhat startling. But the things, one of the things I certainly will have taken away from this weekend is to observe myself that somebody who was there in need for someone else, who was able to be with that person and listen when that person was going through a devastating situation. That to me was more than all of our talking and facts and all that. We tend to give the outside world all of this detail and data, and yet in a sense humanity is constantly moving on. There's human progression. The world is not stuck. It's moving on. Think of all the groups that now use this space, who we can learn from. But we are still talking in a very 19th century way. But unless we transform this material, there is a statement from HPB. She says that the study of the secret doctrine without the voice of the silence will lead the student to the path of being a Pratyeka Buddha. My brain, my knowledge, my study, and even worse, black magic. So on that happy note, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will look at another essence. We will look at some of the more detailed things: potentiality of mind, thought in germ, and ideation in activity, some of the more detailed parts. So we'll take this break. We've nourished the body.